travels through this whole journey. And what will happen is like in terms of object oriented, like maybe like we'll be tempted to reuse, we create a product class with all the features that it has, and we'll try to reuse it across all the context. That is what we'll normally be tempted to do. But in case of DDD, that's not the case. Like if you see the product, let's say when you have a product catalog, right? Like you will have more details about the product's technical specifications. Maybe like the RAM, let's say if you take a laptop, a RAM, CPU, and a lot more details, right? But when you go to the inventory, like you don't care about it, right? Like all you care about it is the count. How many count of this product I have. But if you try to reuse the same product class in all these areas, like then you're creating a huge product class with all details, which is not relevant to a specific context. So that is where like the bounded context comes into picture, and how we kind of use the product or a specific class in specific to this particular context. Maybe let me just move to the next slide. So this is, as you see, right, like, so we have a product like, which spans across multiple contexts like shopping, product catalog, pricing, everything. And if we try to reuse it, like, we are definitely going to reach to a state like this, where we'll have a product class which has behaviors related to shopping, almost related to all the context. But in terms of DDD, that is not what we want to do. Like what we want to do is we will just stick to the specific context and create the product class accordingly. For example, again, right, like let's say if you are moving to an order, like you might be interested in the weight attribute. But in terms of the cart, like you may not be interested in it, you might be interested only in the count. So we create product class in those specific context and maintain only those attributes. And we are talking about bounded context. There is also an interesting article that is written by Martin Fowler. I'll just drop the link also here so that you could later refer to this. I'll do that like once I'm done with the session. Okay. And so talking about bounded context and subdomains, right? Like so, let's say like the one that you're dealing with right now is an e-commerce domain, and we are talking about various functionalities like the catalog, the inventory, doing payments, order management, and all that. So all this falls under a subdomain. And even in subdomains, what happens is that like, there are different types of subdomains. Like we have core subdomains, supporting subdomains, and generic subdomains, right? Let's say what is a core subdomain? Core subdomain is something related to the core business. So in case of e-commerce, like what is the core business? That is selling products. So if you take like the product catalog, order management, all this comes under the core subdomain. Then we have supporting subdomains, right? Like let's say we have supporting subdomain, which is we have a core business, but we still need some more subdomains using which we will be able to fulfill a process. For example, here you can take even the user management, right? Like so, our main goal is to sell products, but without users, you will not be able to sell the products. But the user management comes in as a supporting subdomain. Let's say if you want to take reporting and take some details out of this, so that again comes under supporting subdomain. The final one that we have is a generic subdomain, right? Where like we have some generic solutions which we can build it, or like there are also third-party alternatives that are available. A very good example of that could be a payment service, right? So what we do is like we do all this processing here, and for payment, like we call like a payment provider, so they give you various options, right? Like you don't worry about whether you want to use a card or something like that is taken care of by the payment subdomain, which can be it can be a third-party service as well. So that is where the generic subdomain comes in. Feel free to stop me at any point. So we talked about bounded context and the subdomains, right? Like so, the one that you see on the left-hand side is the problem space, right? I mean the business space, like where you talk about different subdomains. And when you move into solution space, that is where you will start talking about the bounded context. And here, as you see, like in many cases, like a subdomain can be mapped to a solution, a bounded context. But there are also possibilities like a subdomain can be mapped to multiple bounded contexts. Here, a very good example that you can see here is in case of inventory, right? Like in here, as you see the mapping, like there is like one inventory subdomain that is being mapped to inventory bounded context. An example that I could give here is let's take Amazon, right? Like, so they deal with a lot of stuff and a lot of products basically. Like, let's say there is one set of products related to electronics, and they also have a service like a fresh where they sell provisions. So in terms of subdomain, this is a single subdomain, right? But when you move into bounded context, like this can be separate bounded context, like where one bounded context deals with the inventory related to electronic devices, and another bounded context is something that deals with inventory related to fresh value with the provisions, vegetables, or whatever. And also moving in terms of team organization, right? Like, see, bounded context is something that could be arrived using one of the technique called as event storming. So that is one very good technique that we have used and arrived at bounded context. I will also talk about this later. And so once we do that, right, once we identify the bounded context, like we have to form teams around the bounded context, across functional teams with all the roles, like BA, Dev, QA, using the bounded context. And one more thing that we have to be aware of is, like, if we start having like multiple teams working within a single bounded context, that it means that like it has already become bigger, and it is time to break that into smaller chunks. So as you could see here, right, like this is just a representation of like what I was explaining. So we have multiple bounded contexts, and we have cross-functional teams for each of these bounded contexts. Yeah, this is quickly about bounded context and how we are able to relate to this in the previous exercise also, right? And any questions or anything to add from you, Sandeep? Yes, Manpreet.
Yeah, I think uh, the the bounded context, right, can be a good starting point to organize your team, because typically what we have seen in anytime you have team bigger than, let's say, 20-30 people, and I've seen teams accounts as big as 150 people, and that's where I think how to split teams becomes one of a typical challenging question. And if you read Team Topology's book, it talks about stream aligned teams, and that roughly is basically a bounded context. So you can, and the like shopping bounded context team would consist of fully all roles, as Satish was mentioning, including the UI, right? They might be developed the micro front end for, let's say, shopping part or order part, and they can, so it's right from database up to the UI, everything would be developed for order, would be developed by order bounded context team. The platform one is interesting because you may have like cross-functional requirements, or you may have some requirements which could be generically reused across this bounded context. That's where the platform team comes into picture. And for them, technology is a domain, right? Take an example of, you are developing a marketplace to sell insurance from something like Policy Bazaar. Say you are Policy Bazaar, you sell insurance of different types across from different companies, like Bharti AXA may have insurance, ICICI Lombard may have insurance, and you are selling them as a third party broker in between, as a Policy Bazaar, for example. So in this case, you have two domains coming into picture, right? One is a technology domain, because you generally want to onboard any product from any vendor, insurance product, and you have insurance as a domain, basically. So two domains coming in picture, and that technology domain is where the platform team helps you getting the generic functionality developed. So do give a Team Topologies book a read. It's very interesting. Yeah.
We have few hands of like Manpreet.
Yeah, so we talked about that each subdomain can be mapped to a bounded context. I wanted to know how, and each subdomain can be mapped to multiple bounded contexts. So I wanted to know, how do we take that decision that a subdomain needs to be mapped to one bounded context or multiple?
It depends upon the size of the bounded context. I think there are like so many things that needs to be done, right? Like the example that I gave here is also, let's say here we are talking about inventory subdomain, and here if you're talking about dealing with inventory for a particular product like electronics, and that is and another set of inventory, like where we are talking about fresh products and provisions. So these are like completely different areas that we are focusing on. And the way we develop the system will also be varying. And that is why like we can take a call, like we could break this. It's all about even in terms of microservices, right? Like why do we want to go into microservices? Because like when we go with monolith, like it is really big, and we want to start breaking this complexity into smaller chunks and focus on only those small areas. And the same rule applies here as well.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Additionally, another example to what Satish is saying, another example could be you may have in inventory subdomain, say that you have a third party product dealing with inventory, and then it's not satisfying some of the requirement your domain experts have. So you decide to build as an inventory subdomain, a team sitting inside there decides to build a custom homegrown solution, right? So now there are two things here. One is a third party inventory product which you have been using, and you develop something as a team. But you can see that the language, so the language is a key for the bounded context, right? Even though it's an inventory subdomain, but the way COTS product or third party product talks about inventory is different than how your domain experts talk about, because maybe the specialized thing in within your inventory subdomain. And you can see that then the language is changing, right? Terms are changing, and that's one more hint for splitting, having two different bounded contexts, even though it happens to be inventory subdomain or inventory department. The language the language and the way things, the way business expert refer to things starts changing. You can roughly say that there are two bounded contexts in play. That's another hint. Like language is another hint. Yeah, I think Italy and I think
Raja, I think Raja has his hand up.
Yeah, I have one use case, something like so in terms of like preparing the bounded context, or in terms of coming into like the microservice, what we need to build. And I'm talking about like one insurance company. They are actually modernizing their middleware integration layer. So as part of that middleware integration layer, it is mostly connecting dots between the source and destination, and hardly they develop any core business logic. So in the legacy, they actually have, let's say, TIBCO engines as part of the TIBCO business log, which is kind of like the middleware integration layer. So they are actually trying to modernize that TIBCO engines into microservices in Java. So most of the time, it has been seen that it's a direct one-to-one mapping from that TIBCO engine to the microservice. But how to actually, following microservice architecture, how do we actually, facilitate this situation, like draw a bounded context, then coming into like how many microservices we need to build to cater this whole migration of this middleware layer. Probably my question is kind of like it would need further exploration, but that is I'm actually currently dealing with, and I need some help on there.
Yeah, we can talk about it when we talk about event storming probably.
Yeah.
So when we talk about, I think Satish should cover event storming. That time we can take up this question, so you can bring it back, Raja, that time.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, maybe when I cover that, I will also talk about the experience that we had,
Yeah.
so that you'll be able to relate to it. Thank you. I think that's it we have. Yeah. So just moving on. Okay, so we talked about bounded context and moving on to ubiquitous language, right? So how many times, like, the teams that have faced, right? Like, you would have had a discussion with domain of experts. Let's say the technical team goes and talks to the domain experts, understand their requirement, and we build something. And after some time, we'll go back to them and we get a response saying, okay, this is something that I did not want. I mentioned something else, but you understood something else. So, have you faced it? Any one of you, like, can you share your experience? Any instances like where you had a conversation and you developed something, but that is something that the business did not want? Come on, people, there are 20 people in the call, so no one has any experience. Okay, maybe I can talk about one of the experience that we had. So that is, so we were dealing with the banking domain, and so there was a talk about account balance, right? What does an account balance mean? How much money that you have in the account, right? But when you generically say account balance, there are multiple possibilities. Let's say you open any one of your online accounts, and if you see like there will be a balance, that may be a ledger balance, how much amount that you have in your account, and there is also an available balance, how much money that you could withdraw. So let's say if you have 5,000 in your account, you will not be able to withdraw all that. Maybe like 4,000 or 4,500, something that you'll be able to withdraw. And this is where the miscommunication happens, right? Like because you don't talk the same language. There are multiple teams who are involved in this whole process, but they don't talk the same language, and that is where the problem. And what ubiquitous language, this is where the ubiquitous language comes into help. So this is a way of like clearly explaining what is the problem that you are solving in this particular domain, and we have to make sure that like everyone talks the same language, right? Like right from developers, domain experts, talking the same language, and it's not only about talking the language, right? It's also about bringing that language to your code when you create classes. So when you create your code, you have to reflect that specific domain language so that all of us talk the same language. Even when you have an issue, like when you go back to the domain experts and talk to them, all of us talk the same language. And this again, like this can vary between multiple bounded contexts, right? Like even in our case, like we have, let's say we have an order management bounded context. So there are certain terms that we could use are related to like customer order, order status, order fulfillment, shipment tracking. So these are related to order management bounded context. But if you take another bounded context like a customer support, right? Like if customer support is completely different one. Let's say you place an order and then you have an issue related to order, and that is where you contact the customer support, and this goes through a different flow. So in case of customer support, there are generic terms like support tickets, ticket status, escalation, resolution. So these are some of the terms. And what we here have to make sure that like we speak, everyone speak the same language in context of the in the bounded context. Good. Any questions or anyone want to add any of your experience here? How this was not really followed, and what are any challenges that you face that you want to highlight?
Yeah, I can think of one thing.
Sure, please go ahead.
Yeah, so basically, like we have the same thing like a product, and after like some filtering and things like that, we were consuming it, and for a long time, it was called product itself in our bounded context as well, because it was like there was another team which was maintaining the product, and they had the product and they had a lot more things in it. But we were taking only like we were filtering based on the partner, and each variation of the product was being saved, but we were still saving it as product because it was called product instead. But the ID that was the main ID that was coming with it was called partner variation ID. And what we had was basically product, and the product ID was had to be mapped to partner variation ID every time there's an event from outside that is coming, right? Like so there was that ambiguity, and then we were confused whether to name the ID as a partner variation ID and have a separate product ID, or completely change our domain to have a partner variation instead of a product, which would be the correct process, because right now there was a very inconsistent thing between, because what we were getting was actually a partner variation of the product, but we were calling it as a product, which is not the same for um, outside the bonded context or even outside our team. So, like, yeah, we basically went with renaming the entire thing and even the IDs. But my question or like my comment is basically around when we are dealing with different teams, right? Like sometimes they use some language across like in all the teams, and but maybe like one team is using a different language. And when we are sending like or when we are consuming events or when we are publishing events, right? And like at least when we are publishing events, like we do not have to map it because we do not know who's going to consume it. But when we are consuming, every time there's a mapping is required because the language is ubiquitous language is different there. So is there something that is also needed to have across the organization some common language or common terms?
I mean, across the organization, right? If you try to do that, like that is where most of this problem arises, right? Like let's say again, if you take an example of stock, right? Like in terms of trade, like it gives you different meaning, but in terms of inventory, it gives you different meaning. So the rule here is like, I mean, that's like you have to see on the slide, right? Like each bounded context has its own ubiquitous language. So we try to stick to the bounded context, but as I said, like there is an overhead of this mapping that we need to do. But at a bounded context level, we have to make sure that like we follow a particular language. So even in our case, when I talked about the account balance, like this was not clear, and this was causing a lot of confusion. So later, so this was renamed to a ledger balance, which talks about the balance that is there in your account and also an available balance. So this kind of cleared the confusion. So now no longer we worry about like what exactly this means, and everyone is aligned on these terms. And the only thing that we have to make sure is that like when you start the initial phase, like you have to align on the language and make sure that like that gets translated right from your discussion into the code.
Yeah, I mean, like in the previous example where order has a product and the sorry, order has a product and the cart has a different product, let's say, right? Then because both we are calling it as a product, right? I feel like it will be more confusing because what product is for cart is different than what product is. But when we are speaking, then say, yeah, I also have a product, you also have a product, and then
Now that is where in terms of cart, it is not a product, it is an item. Right? When we talk about cart, like we never say a product, right? Like we talk about an item. So these are the improvements that we have.
yeah.
So when you do this, like then this will be clear, and you will not have this confusion.
Yeah, I think if you have specific names for the thing in your bounded context, you could name them accordingly, right? If a product, say a customer is a lead for you in marketing, you can name it such. That's not a problem. But calling it product at both places, that's okay in the sense that you're talking about a product in context of inventory bounded context, and then you're talking it's always in some context, right? And in that context, if you can think of a good name to a product, go for it. I mean, that's okay. And as Satish is saying, right, if we try to do one domain model, then that's a canonical domain model that would create a lot of problems actually. I mean, if you search Martin Fowler's article on canonical domain model and why it doesn't work, because I think if we go back to previous slides, it would take us, that canonical model kind of takes us to, I think, a little bit, the first which shows the, uh, I think one slide, one more. Yeah, the one previous to this. Yeah, right, that code example, right? That's the canonical model, like one definition. Um, but probably you're just talking about citation, you're talking about naming them respectively in particular bounded context. Yes, that's good. That's a good practice. If that's possible. And the translation, yeah, unfortunately, translation needs to be maintained, right? You are reading domain event from someone, some other bounded context. You are going to interpret what you, as your bounded context, what it means. You are going to translate it, give it as a command to aggregate, and then aggregate can create a domain event in your own terminology and in your own ubiquitous language in that bounded context. But yeah, translation would be need to be done.
I mean, if it is in the just like within let's say like the same team, it is much easier because you even understand what it means in this bounded context and what are the IDs that are passed and what exactly you have to map it to. but especially when it is coming from different team, it's very hard as developers to understand like which ID or which exactly field I have to map to, and especially if there are like it's a complex system and there are many different IDs or many different things that you need to map to. With a
Maybe
very
the confluence with good documentation should help also here.
yeah.
I mean, so just consider this as a third party service, right? Like, so you have many services, right? At maybe like any point of time, like one of them might become a generic domain and like you want to remove your service and integrate with the third party service. Like, when you do that, like, will you be able to have common terminologies across, right? That is not possible. Because like each of them have their own terminologies, and maybe when there is a requirement, we have to do this translation. For that, like, I mean, as Sandeep mentioned, we should have proper documentation which clearly explains those terminology and we are able to map it. Because unless we don't do that, right, like, I mean, even this moves, why do we do microservices at any point of time? Like, we can switch things. So you develop a payment service for now, and later you figure out that, okay, I have a third-party payment service like, which is much cheaper and which is much efficient than using my own, and I want to switch to this.
Yeah. I see the advantage with having different, like different domains in each bounded context. But there are also like there could be like some disadvantages to it as well. But I
Yeah.
think it's more advantages than.
So there is always a trade-off, right? Like when you just like say when you move from monolith to microservice, again that is always a trade-off. Yeah. Good. And I think so. This picture again, the slide is here that again reiterates like what we have been talking, right? Like so it's not about setting in just setting an Ubiquitous language for a particular context. It is also about making sure that like everyone talks the language, whether it is a domain experts, development team, not only the people and also the code. Because you talk about something and then like you name it differently, like, and then it will be hard to relate back. Let's say you have an issue with your code, and like if you do this, like, you'll be able to go back to the domain experts and talk in the same language. That's about Ubiquitous language. Any other questions?
Hey, one point to add, right?
Sure, go ahead.
As in everything, right? Even the ubiquitous language keeps evolving, right? It is not kind of etched in stone. One thing that would help is documenting or having a glossary of terms in terms of what things mean, because your team members keep coming in and going out, right? You get new members in. The new members might need something as a reference to understand what the team means because you will be like totally, it's a language after all. People will understand the terms that you're using in the ubiquitous language. Who are there in the team, they will understand. Probably somebody who's new to the team, they will find it very hard to understand what is going on, right? So having a glossary and documenting the meaning of the terms in the ubiquitous language will actually help in real life problems.
Thank you. Thanks, Steve. Any other questions or comments? Okay, I think if not, I think we could take a quick break for 10 minutes and then come back by 11:50. So as we always say, like, please move away from your seats. Then good. So let's just come back by 11:50 then.